let's just jump right in. I mean, this is going to be probably more informal than than you usually do. It's Sam Kabert, right? That's how you say your last
Kabert.
name.
Kabert.
Kabert. Oh, it is Kabert. Okay, because I'm like, is it
Yeah.
Kabert or Kabert? Because I want to say Kabert, and I'm like, no, it's got to be Kabert, but it is Kabert. All right.
Yeah, I get this question more often than not, and it's always funny. It's like, no, it's as simple as you think, as it looks.
It
Like
is
K
Kabert.
Bear, and then
Yeah.
sometimes I'll get K Bear. I'm like, I don't know where you're getting K Bear from.
Oh yeah, I'm going with K Bear from now on. All
Yeah,
right.
yeah, it's cool.
Perfect. All right. So yeah, we're already recording. Hello, everybody. This is Tim. I'm with Sam Kabert. Sam is someone who I've known for a while, and I was lucky enough to be on his podcast a few months ago. And Sam, I think, covers how we as normal human beings can integrate somatic body work, breath work into our life and deal with, what we like to call shadow parts better than most people that I've encountered in, especially in the law of attraction, law of assumption space. Sam's background is very interesting. We're going to get into all that, and Sam has a new book out. So Sam, yeah, thank you for being here. And do you want to just, first of all, just, tell us a little bit about your journey? Because you've had a pretty amazing journey, quite honestly, that I'm sure people would be interested in. And you can go into it, or you don't have to, but your background is different than a lot of people that I have on the show, because, you have a lot of success in business and implementing things and taking action before you integrated any of this more spiritual, holistic healing stuff. And I love that about you, and I love that about how you teach. So I think it would be beneficial just to hear a little bit about your backstory before you got into this stuff, and then how you've gotten into this more alternative, health and healing.
Yeah, thank you so much, Tim. My body's lighting up right now because I feel seen. You see me, brother. So I appreciate the reflection. And it's just I'm so honored to be here, because when I reached out to you to ask you to be on my podcast, that was because specifically I listened to a few of your books, but one of them, Relax More, Try Less, was just so huge for me. So it's cool now, I really do feel honored to be on your show. So thank you for having me. And yeah, in terms of what you said with the business success and integration, that is interesting. I have made that correlation for myself a couple of times, but I've never really like sat with that, and no one's ever really, at least not in a while, I can't think of anyone recently, like reflected that back. And I do think that's why I am so passionate about integration. And in my journey in 2019, I went through a numbing depression as a result of chasing success. I actually just gave a TEDx talk this past weekend about this message of soul life balance that came through in an ayahuasca ceremony. Not obviously, but in the TED talk, I didn't mention any plant medicine or anything like that.
But here you can.
Yeah,
As you
yeah. It was funny because, dude, it's so interesting with the TED talk, because there's like a whole list of things you can talk about and things you can't. And I'm like, I've seen plenty of other TEDx's that talk about this stuff, but okay, fine, whatever. So in my TED talk, which will be released, I don't know, maybe in July or August of 2024, I say something about how the muse spoke to me in all kinds of ways. So I have like those little Easter eggs, or like those little winks to the people I know, like, you know what the muse is about, right? Yeah. But yeah, that was kind of cool. So it started with ayahuasca, and honestly, before ayahuasca, it started with a breathwork journey. I was numb. I was sleepless depression. It got really dark, and I was on the brink of being named to Silicon Valley's 40 under 40 list. I knew it was about to happen. I knew I was about to hit $1 million in sales that year finally. And I was dating a cheerleader of my favorite NFL team, the 49ers, and networking with the execs of the Niners, and networking with the who's who of Silicon Valley. So from the outside, like, had everything, right? But I was numbing myself with work and hazy IPAs and fantasy football for a number of years. Lots of distractions to numb myself. And it just got to a point where I couldn't anymore. And a breathwork journey found me. I literally felt reborn. It was the most wild thing. And then I did an ayahuasca journey a week after that. And that first night of ayahuasca was like, a lifetime of therapy for me. And that's when I was like, show me everything.
Mhm.
I remember the facilitator, not a shaman, but the facilitator in the Aya journey saying something to me like, oh, you're the deep diver. Like he's like, who wants a second cup? I'm like, let's go. But anyways, I jumped around from medicine ceremony to medicine ceremony, as a lot of people do when they're brand new into it. And as I started to see that in myself and in other people, that's when I started to become very passionate about integration. Because my meditation teacher, shout out to Charlie Johnson, he at the time had never worked with psychedelics, and he was a little cautious, and we could say skeptical, about me sitting with ayahuasca. And he said something very important. He said, make sure that you're working, he might have said using this medicine as a tool and not a crutch. So I found that when I first started working with medicines, I was very much working with it as a tool. But then once I started to find community, not to shift blame on anyone else or anything like that, but I am very much susceptible to peer pressure or like group think. So, and I do know that about myself. So when I started to join a few different communities, I started to get a little bit more relaxed. And then over time, like that advice of a tool and not a crutch started to slip away. And I
Mm.
started to see that in others, which was a mirror for me seeing that for myself. So that was really how I became so passionate about integration, integrating medicine ceremonies into everyday life. And then I wrote my book, Soul Life Balance, A Guide to Igniting and Integrating Spiritual Awakenings, in 2022. 2023, I wrote a quick workbook called Psychedelic Compass. It's for people that you and I are both authors, right? We're always like writing books, it seems like,
Right.
right?
Some of the few. Yeah, we're
Yeah,
both prolific. We write stuff. Yeah, exactly.
yeah, we're speaking the same language here. Like, wait, a book a year or whatever. Yeah, we
Right.
we see each other. Yeah, so that was last year, and then right now at the time of this recording, it's mid-May 2024. I went to Bali for a Kundalini training in November, December of 2023. I came back in January, and I started doing expressive writing, the Pennebaker protocol, about writing about a traumatic event from your life. And that was about something that happened less than 12 months before that. And in writing that, I started to get like a whisper to write a fiction book about what happened, loosely based off of what happened. And I don't know how to write fiction. I don't read fiction. I love movies, but like when it comes to reading, I'm just self-help and that's it. I don't really mess around with fantasy. I rather watch it. That's just who I am. So I had no idea. So I started watching a master class on how to write fiction books. And I was writing this fiction book for just a couple of weeks. And then all of a sudden, this other book wanted to be birthed through me. And that became my new book now, Overcome the Overwhelm. Like literally, this book was, in a sense, channeled, not all of it, but like 50 to 65, 70% of it really felt like it was channeled and it was just coming through me. And that's kind of been my journey on a high level. I'm a breathwork facilitator, yoga instructor, keynote speaker to corporate, and I kind of weave this message into corporate audiences of soul life balance with accessible language and mindfulness, and not go too deep into esoteric themes to meet them where they're at. And I'm also a psychedelic integration and guide where we go really deep in that work. So that's some high level stuff.
Great. Yeah, that was a great high level overview for sure. Um, yeah, I just love how authentic you are. And I think that your journey is it's very different than most people that um, I interact with, like in kind of like the mindfulness slash, mainly now like law of attraction, law of assumption space. Again, just because you're very proactive, like you had this transformative experience, and then like really, a very profound 5-6 years since then, and doing substantial inner work on yourself. And what's interesting is that you're producing a lot, you're getting certified and working with people and writing books and really still putting a lot of stuff out there. I would venture that's just in a way like who you are, because before perhaps more it was out, getting results externally to get the results, which you did exceptionally well. And now it's trying to integrate, and successfully doing so, the outer and the inner. And as you know, it's in your new book, you've got that, I think you quote, I think you're a meditation teacher of yours or someone, but the line, like practice doesn't make perfection, but practice makes practice. Like we do it to do it. And you're one of the few people I've encountered talking about this stuff who really like that's your message. Like it's not like you're like, people are always selling the dream, I feel like, in this space way too often, like, and in self-improvement in general, and even when it comes to like medicine ceremonies, and they don't sell just doing it to do it, practicing it. And like if you find a good teacher, as you've been fortunate to find good teachers, I've been fortunate to find good teachers, good mentors, etc., they all tell you that, like, we're doing this to do, we are doing it, we are living it, we are going through it now, this is what it's about. But I mean, I think you're more successful than me at it translating that. Like I still can't figure out how to translate that to like a corporate audience, or even a large, even manifesting audience, because it's like not selling the dream, except for the dream of doing the work, doing the practice right now, and having the fulfillment of that right now by being comfortable being yourself. Does that ring true to
Yeah.
you?
Oh, 100%. And I got chills again, another synchronicity with you bringing up the practice makes practice. I know exactly what you're talking about. I didn't quote her, but her name's Katie Jacobson, and she's a local yoga instructor. And I stopped teaching yoga about a year ago, but I literally responded to a request of hers where she sent asking for her sub today, and had some correspondence with her. And I don't really correspond with her often. So it's kind of funny that you brought that up, but I remember, yeah, seeing being in her class the first time that she said, practice makes practice. And I mean, sometimes in a yoga class, when a yoga instructor says something profound, it just kind of hits you, and that was one of those times where I was like, whoa, because it's been so ingrained and conditioned into me that practice makes perfect. And that was very much around the time when I had this like whisper message of soul life balance, but I didn't know what to do with it. And as I started like really thinking and reflecting on practice makes practice, what does that actually mean? I started to realize that I have been so focused on perfection and the end destination. And that's one of my messages with soul life balance, where it's like, with work life balance, I know for me and a lot of people that use that term, it's almost talked about like it's reaching an elusive state of one day obtaining work life balance, then you're there, right?
Right.
Yeah. And for me, I mean, I built up this $1 million company. I mean, let's not go crazy here or anything, because I was selling products. So there's cost of goods sold tied to that, but with no employees, virtual assistants as my team, and working less than a few hours a day, like probably two
Right.
hours a day. I was probably making, like, in revenue for the business, over $700,000, working 2 to 4 hours a day for like 3 years. And then I finally hit seven figures. And I had that elusive state of work-life balance, yet I was so numb. I was so depressed. And that was something that I was chasing. So yeah, for me, in terms of this ringing true, it absolutely, one of my core like messages is like, hey, sometimes we'll be a little bit more in the life side or the outer world side or the yang or the masculine, whereas other times we're going to be more in that inner world, the yin, the feminine, right? And that's okay. We're going to release any guilt and shame that comes with it. And that's what makes it balance, soul life balance. And yeah, I could keep going, but I think that kind of covers it.
It's so profound, though. I mean, this is like, just again, for people new to Sam and his work, like what you described, like if I'm talking to, like, I guess more my audience now, like the manifesting audience, right? The people into Neville and, even Dr. Joe and like Abraham Hicks. Like, so you can come at it from more of the quote unquote science perspective or the quote unquote spiritual perspective. In reality, I think they all fuse together and are all basically pointing at the same general positive theme. The dream of a lot of people is to do what you were able to accomplish. And you're saying that it left you, the word that comes up is soulless. That's not, obviously, I mean,
Yeah,
you
totally.
use soul in a different way, but like, the whole point is like, it doesn't work the way you think it's going to work a lot of the time. And I've seen this in my life over and over again. And I think it was in one of the books I wrote about Neville. It might have been Relax More, Try Less, where like, or it might have been Manifestation Through Relaxation, where it's like, often we hit a goal that we previously were excited about, maybe years prior, or maybe just months prior. And either we don't even notice or we don't even give a shit anymore because we're so over it. And often it's because we're burnt out and we tried too hard to hit it. And like, we lost the practice makes practice idea of it. And we were so outwardly oriented, yang oriented, right? That like, we do not feel okay, right? And I mean, you talk about this in the new book about like, working with corporate executives and other people in, very high power business positions, where it's like they're so out of whack in terms of this balance that like they're just like literally physically collapsing, like, because they can't deal with it. So yeah, I mean, I would love for you to expand upon that more, because it's a very important point, not discussed enough.
Man, that blew my mind because I was working with a client last year where she was just starting to work with plant and earth medicines, brand new to this. She's probably in her 50s and an executive IT firm and in a location where, still dealing with some like sexist type stuff, being a woman and high powered, like you said. And she would send me pictures of her face just like ripped up and bruises of these collapses she had, and she told me it happened several times where she just kind of just collapsed for no reason. And then I was just like, whoa, I don't really know what to do with that because I haven't worked with anyone or heard of anyone directly experiencing that. And then I had another client, I don't remember the time frame of all of this. Like, it all happened within maybe 4 to 6 months of each other. But it was probably closer to 4 months, the 3 clients. So then I had another client who's a 23-year-old kid who had the same thing. And that wasn't from work. That was just from his stress. And then I went to Bali for Kundalini training, and one of the guys there was at McKinsey overseas, the big data research company. I'm not sure, consulting.
What McKinsey is anymore, right? We know McKinsey.
Yeah, exactly. And he was about to make partner there. So he was at the edge of burnout, and he started telling me about like these collapses he'd have where he'd fall on his face. And at this point, I'm like, you gotta be kidding me. Like, really? You too? Wow. So anyways, yeah, that's a thing where we start to disassociate. And I think a good way to visualize it or connect with it is through the Pixar movie Soul, and where there's the hedge fund manager and he's on the computer, and then they're in the astral plane and they zap him to like wake him up. And so he becomes activated and he remembers like he has a spiritual awakening just through it's like a Kundalini activation. It's Shaktipat. And then the guy just starts throwing the computers everywhere. He's like, I'm free. And we just we're disconnected. So many of us in the business world, or maybe it's not the business world, maybe it's from your trauma. Like so many of us in general are disconnected, right?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. It's just it is interesting that in the business world, you see people who are so successful, and yet there's this like obvious breakdown on some level occurring, right? And
Mhm.
I think it's a general thing. I mean, I think it affects everybody in different ways. But I mean, this is, I think, a good segue to kind of talk about some of the pragmatic things we can do, because your new book, Overcome the Overwhelm, is really about, you have 6 main steps in there, right? And we'll
Mhm.
go over this, really about getting in touch with ways to overcome the overwhelm, right? And this is the kind of thing that I think most people who watch my channel are familiar with the idea of somatic work, breath work, uh, even things like shadow work and IFS. These are all things we like to discuss. But what's really good about this book is that you just go over you tell people how they can integrate and implement it in a very straightforward manner. So if you want, and it depends how much time we have, but I would love to just go over some of that stuff. We can do, if you want to do a big picture, we can do that. But I would love to just talk about um, some of the breath stuff. What is it? It's how do you say that? Cyclical breathing, or this most simple
Oh, the
kind?
cyclic sigh. Yeah, the
Cyclic
yeah,
sigh, right?
yeah.
Yeah, I would love to do just a little bit of that.
Okay, cool.
But do you want to give kind of a big picture overview, or
Yeah,
what?
yeah, let's do it. I got it. Cool. So one thing I'll say just to set the stage is the 90-second rule. And speaking of like somatics, I did a breathwork facilitator training program through a company called Somatic Breathwork. I've done my yoga teacher training, some other certifications, and lots of like self-study and all this stuff. If I ever heard anyone talk about the 90-second rule, it was in one ear and out the other. I don't know how I discovered it last year in 2023. I really don't remember, other than seeing it on Dr. Jill Bolte Taylor's TED Talk, which is from 2008. And her TED Talk in 2008, entitled My Stroke of Insight, was the big TED Talk back then in 2008 that really made TED go viral.
Mhm.
And you would think, being that's from 2008, that was the thing that took TED to the next level. And TED is so mainstream that in a yoga teacher training, or a somatic breathwork training, or just being in spiritual and mindful communities, we would all know about the 90-second rule. Like how you said, we know IFS and we know this and we know that, or emotions are energy in motion, or dark night of the soul, or just whatever. But no, we don't know about the 90-second rule. It's not something we talked about. And when I discovered this, I was like, oh my God, this is the missing piece. So the 90-second rule basically teaches us that our bodies have a 90-second physiological response when we experience an emotion. And emotions are energy in motion. So when we put these two together, now all of a sudden it's like, huh, maybe it's not so scary to feel, because this will pass. Literally, science is teaching us that this will pass if we allow ourselves to feel it, as opposed to when we constrict, we contract, we tighten, we dissociate, and we avoid. Then that emotion, that energy, is not allowed to go in motion, and it gets stuck and stored in the body. So the whole premise off the 6-step breath process is that emotions are energy in motion, and that our bodies process these emotions in 90 seconds.
Mhm.
So with that,
That's
the
huge.
6-step.
Can I
Yeah.
just, so that's, yeah, thank you for, because that is hugely important to mention. Um, and just to reemphasize, because I've heard that again, I heard you say it, I think a couple months ago or somewhere. I
I say
forget
a
if we
lot.
talked. Yeah, no, it's great, but it's like, it's one of the, it was a lot like a lot of the stuff that I talk about that's from 50 or 100 years ago, where I'm like, why the heck aren't more people talking about this? Like, it's like, and
Mhm.
it's like, even Neville, it's like, well, some of the things he says are like, I'm like, why wasn't this popular 25 years ago? Whatever. But the 90-second thing is you hear stuff like it, but you're right. It does seem to go in one ear out the other. And I think one reason is it's hard to believe it.
Mm, yeah.
And I, just to get deep here, it's like, even for me, like I do believe it, but as you know, when we're processing an emotion and it's difficult, it's like, yes, it might only take 90 seconds for the body to go through it. But as you say in your new book, and as you know, so many great somatic teachers say, like, you got to go slow, the body's slow at the same time, like healing, right? So it's like the actual process is fast, but it's like, well, if the process is fast, why do I still feel like crap the next day? You know what I mean? Like people like add on a mental layer. It almost reminds me of like, you know, like Emile Coué, the French hypnotist, psychotherapist I love, he would just say, like, he's like, it's all this you're thinking. Like if you just shut down your thinking and purely shut it down and start thinking something positive, you would immediately start healing. And it's like, all right, that sounds great on paper. It's like the 90-second thing. And like, I believe that too, but it's like, you know, implement, it's like, it's set, it's might be true, but then like making it so we're actually integrating it is, I think, what your book's about, a lot of your work's about, a lot of what my work is about, is like that's an amazing, if what she's saying is even partially true, that's a total game changer. But like, how do we make it a game changer for us, right?
Yeah, exactly. And that's the 6-step breath process. And we were talking, I was on a podcast this morning and we were talking about, yeah, I don't know, whatever. I am Sam Kabert. I am Ron Burgundy. Sometimes speaking is hard, right?
Sam Kabert.
Yeah, right. So anyways, I was on this podcast this morning and somehow we stumbled on this conversation about how sometimes with just the daily stressors or feelings where you need to go step away to feel your feelings for 90 seconds, a couple of minutes, whatever, and run through the 6 steps. Sometimes that is so much harder when it's something that's not a big deal versus when you're in the thick of it and you're really in it. And for context, 2023 was one of the most challenging times of my life. And my Bible became Dr. Joe Dispenza's Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself. I studied that book meticulously and it's incredible. Yet at the same time, I was so frustrated because it was like a scavenger hunt trying to go through it and piece it all together. Yeah. So a lot of what you're reading right now, Tim, in Overcome the Overwhelm, a lot of it's inspired by Dr. Joe's book, Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself. And I bring that up because like last year when I was very much in the thick of it, and if I was feeling like something as a direct result of like a trauma, it was like, okay, now it's easier for me to step away and do this. Whereas like now that like everything's good, I'm integrating and like for the most part feeling really great. It's like if I can feel something's off, but I'm not sure what it is, usually my indicator is that I'm numbing myself with food and I'm emotionally in binge eating. It's so much harder for me to step away if it's something that I don't know why, right? And to your point, it's all mental. After the body processes it for a couple of minutes, we're hanging on to the story as opposed to the actual feeling. So
Right.
with all of this, yeah, anything else you want to expand there?
No, exactly. It's like that's what's so difficult to notice. It's like,
Yeah.
sometimes it's like, okay, the feeling, the initial shock, like that very sensory, like the sensational feeling, which can be very intense, very, we say contractive, like in this space a lot, but just intense, right? It's not gonna last.
Yeah.
And yet we make it, even if we're, the mind body relationship is so fascinating.
It really is. Yeah. I didn't think I was going to share this story publicly, but I'll share it. So I just, we'll get back to the 6 steps. This is funny. So, I just delivered my first TED talk, TEDx talk this past weekend. I've gotten into public speaking, keynote speaking 2 years ago, and I've probably done like 20 keynotes since getting into it. And I'm getting more and more confident. But leading up to this TED talk, I put so much pressure on myself. Like we could unpack that and expand there, but it was, needless to say, it was a big opportunity. I practiced my talk 40 times at least leading up to it, and I felt really confident. The morning of my TED talk, I'm feeling great. I'm in Sugar Land, Texas. I'm a California guy, so I woke up at 5 a.m., which was 3 a.m. my time, ran through the talk 3 times, show up to the venue. I'm stoked. There's 4 other speakers. They're all pretty much nervous, and I'm just like, let's go. I'm ready for this. I'm the third speaker. And then we're outside of the actual room as speakers. We're standing outside of the room, but they have a screen and audio showing what's happening on the inside. So I'm just standing outside of the room, and there's a TV, and they have like the official TEDx video, and then the MC gets on stage introducing everyone. And at this point, I drank 3 cups of coffee. You might see where this is going, and the MC even said to me, he goes, I'd be careful drinking as much coffee as you're drinking. And I was like, yeah, no, I'm good. And at this point, now the MC's on stage and he's doing the introduction thing. And I got into Kundalini, as I mentioned previously, and this Kriya Pranayama, which Kriya Pranayama is basically squeezing your nuts, your balls for us men, right? Or it's a root lock in more PC terminology, right? And it's a Kegel. It's a Kegel. And you're inhaling up for 6 seconds as you hold the top for 6 seconds, and you release. So I'm just casually just standing there watching and doing some Kegels, Kriya Pranayama, essentially. Then all of a sudden, I squeezed a little too hard, and I feel warm sensation going down my leg. And it wasn't like it was a lot, but it was enough to be like, oh my God, I can't believe this is happening. My hotel is 5 minutes away. I'm going on in about an hour. Like, are you kidding me? I'm not even nervous. I'm pumped up. And then like right after that, I was like, oh, the mind body connection. I'm not nervous, but my body is. So yeah, that little rabbit hole. Okay, so the 6 steps. So I'm going to run through them high level, and then we'll unpack each one.
Perfect.
So the 6-step breath process. Breath is an acronym. The B stands for breathe to slow down. The R stands for relax to feel. The E stands for energy to reveal. The AX stands for accept to surrender. The T stands for transform into empowering beliefs. And the H stands for habits to integrate. So basically, it'll look like this. We all experience these triggers from time to time where all of a sudden we're not in the present, we're in the past, the future, reliving a story lost in our mind, flushed with emotions within our body, any of that, right? So for me, typically what I'll do is I'll walk over to the cupboard, grab a big bag of pistachios, and next thing you know, I'm hovering over the trash can, just cracking shells, getting lost in it. And then about like a half bag later of like a big bag of pistachios, I'll think to myself like, what am I doing? What am I avoiding feeling? And now I can go from reacting to responding in that very moment. And I like to paint the picture of like getting yourself to a reaction, because so many of us can relate to like that scroll, be like, I don't know why I'm scrolling, but I'm just scrolling. Why am I doing this? Or checking your email or video games. The point where you get to, what am I doing? That's our opportunity to respond. That's our opportunity to put down however we may be numbing ourselves, to go take a seat and shift from the outer world into the inner world. And that's when we do the very first step, which is breathe to slow down. So this is all about regulating our nervous system. There's no specific form of breath work. It's just focusing on breathing in and out through your nose, letting your exhales be longer than your inhales. Because really, to shift into rest and digest, we want to make sure that we're utilizing the 3 rules of breath work, which are, if we're focusing on activating parasympathetic nervous system, nasal breathing, letting our belly expand, and elongating those exhales. So as we start to breathe, we start to slow down. And as we're slowing down, then we feel. That's the second step, feel. First one's breathe to slow down. The second one's relax to feel. And then we start to relax into it, and then we're feeling it. So now we're feeling these different emotions that are moving through us. Now we remember that emotions are energy in motion, and the 90-second rule. This was where we remind ourselves, like, okay, I'm here to breathe through it. And this is a simple exercise called the cyclic sigh. And Dr. Andrew Huberman, well-known podcaster, he also runs Stanford's lab. And they did a study to compare the different forms of breath work and meditation to see what was going to be most effective to alleviate stress and anxiety. And what they found is this form of the cyclic sigh is more effective than anything else. So for everyone listening or watching, I mean, for those of you like me and have a YouTube subscription, so you can lock your phone and you listen to YouTube like a podcast and you might be multitasking. Like I would just say for anyone that is multitasking, just pause now and come back later till you can be present with us. We'll just do this for a minute. It's fine to just listen in. That's cool too. But what we'll do is if you're not driving, just close your eyes. And Tim will go ahead and land here too. And we'll just feel our feet on the floor, just sitting up straight. And finding an inhale through the nose, inhale all the way up. Sipping a bit more air at the top. Through the mouth, exhale. Slow inhale through the nose, letting the belly expand, bringing that breath all the way up. Sipping a bit more at the top. This time we'll hold the breath and slowly exhale. Another big inhale all the way up. Sipping a bit more at the top. Sipping a bit more. Swallow, roll back the eyes, continue to hold the breath. And exhale. And your own time, you can flicker your eyes back open. Just a quick little demonstration. The cyclic sigh is inhaling all the way up about 90%, sipping in a bit more at the top, then exhaling through the mouth. And you can do that repeatedly. I add on a couple more sips so that you could feel what it feels like. Because I know for me, like I like that feeling of a breath hold. And if I inhale all the way up, sipping a bit more, hold, and then slowly exhale, like this is a good time in this second step to like actually utilize a breathwork practice that resonates with you. But the idea is Neville Goddard stuff right here, right? Like we're relaxing into it. We don't want to activate the sympathetic nervous system. So yeah, I'll pause there.
That's great. Thank you so much for going over that. That's, you know, as you said, one of the more in your book, one of the more simple type of, I guess you could say, breath exercises we could do. And yet, you know, you see Huberman saying this is one of the most effective things we can do if we only have 5 minutes a day to do it.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you for sharing that. And yeah, go ahead.
No, you please.
I just had a question of, do you feel like this is the type of, you know, if we do have time to step away for a minute or two, this seems like a really nice grounding exercise that we can do throughout the day.
Exactly. And that's what I was just going to say as well. A lot of times what I tell my clients is to practice this when you're in conversation with another person. And you don't need to necessarily exhale through the mouth or do it a little bit subtle so people aren't like, hey, what are you doing there? But just focus on your inhales and your exhales. And maybe it's the cyclic sigh, but you're exhaling through your nose versus the mouth. So it's not socially awkward. And as you start focusing on your breath when you're in conversation with someone else, you start to notice that all of those thoughts that you're thinking about, whether you're not paying attention with them or what you're thinking about how you're going to respond, those start to soften, they start to dissipate, and you start to be more present with them. And a lot of people really like that.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just, I know what you mean, where it's like, you don't want to seem weird, you know what I mean? But at the same time, like it is a good way of just not mirroring the person, but like it's truly by, it's strange, like, but I feel like by breathing, you're like breathing and listening to the person at this, like you're breathing in the person and breathing out the
Yeah,
person more.
holding space, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
totally. So yeah, that those are the first two steps. And I've also broke this down into three themes because six steps can be a lot to remember. And the three themes are breathe, feel, and think intentionally. So the first two steps are under breathe, even though the second step is technically feel, because now in the second phase, which is feel, we are getting deeper into the feelings. So, in this second phase or theme, the third step is energy to reveal. This is the one that is so powerful because as we're doing the cyclic sigh or anything else that helps us to calm down and get into our feelings, we start to get curious. Okay, so if this is an energy that's moving through me, what's it here to teach me? What's the lesson? Why am I feeling this way? And a lot of times, like depending on how deep you go, you'll be like, whoa, I didn't know that was there, and when you start to really get curious about these energies. And on the A, that's accept to surrender. Now, these two work together so well because when the energy is revealing something to you in step three, oftentimes we'll be like either middle of a work day or whatever the case may be. It's like, I don't have time for that, or maybe I don't want to look at that, whatever the case may be. Now we need to accept it and we need to surrender to it. If we skip on these two steps, which are pretty damn important in terms of the acronym, the breath acronym, then yes, we will most likely get caught and still thinking about how we were feeling after doing this for a couple of minutes because we probably didn't get real and honest with ourselves enough to feel that energy and to surrender to what it's teaching us. So this is the second phase, and this is where I talk about internal family systems. I think in the book, I do know in the book, I shouldn't say think, that I teach an activation breathwork practice, which is to get you into the sympathetic nervous system. Because I know for a lot of people that especially a lot of people that will be reading this book, they're going to be professionals and new to this stuff where they're just fidgety and that kind of ADHD where it's like I can't sit still and this breathing thing I don't get. So like for those people it's like all right, well, let's shift into fight or flight. That'll get you feeling, so
Right.
doing a little of we could call it Wim Hof or anything else, circular breathing, a mini microdose version of a breath work journey, doing that for like 5 minutes, like that, you'll start to be able to feel if you do something like that. I'm not really recommending people do that. I just think that if you're feeling like, okay, I'm doing what he's saying and nothing's coming through, it's like, okay, well, then try this, you know?
Yeah.
And then finally, the last theme, which is think intentionally. Uh, this makes up step 5 and 6. The first four steps are all shadow work. I'm very passionate about speaking out against toxic positivity. And I do believe that when we think and say something, think and feel something that we don't actually feel to be true, and I know you believe this as well, that energy, then that's what can create dis-ease in our body because we're lying to our body and our body is responding and trying to get our attention. So I like to say after doing the first four steps, we've now earned the right to apply the power of positive thinking. So in step 5, it's empowering, it's transform into empowering beliefs. So basically, this is kind of going back to your question earlier, your statement of like, yeah, but you can still have that lingering feeling after you do these 6 steps. That's why we're alchemizing in step 5 to be like, okay, whatever I was feeling before, like an easy way to look at is what's the opposite of that. And then this gets into a lot of the content you speak on in terms of I am statements. I love what Neville has to say. I will be is to confess that you are not. I think that's close to the quote that Neville has. So, yeah, I am statements in step 5. And finally, step 6, habits to integrate. So, what? Like you've gone through these processes. What came up for you specifically? in step 3 and step 4 of the energy revealing something to you? What did you have to surrender to? What was that thing you didn't realize was there? What action can you take as a result of this? Because honestly, I don't want anyone to be like, oh, yeah, I love the 6 step breath process. It helps me all the time. I use it all the time throughout my day. Like, if I were to hear that, I'd be like, oh, that's not really what I want, because you're probably missing on step 6. Because if you really start to integrate this, then you'll need to use this framework less and less. Because what happens is, if we're someone who constantly is feeling anxiety or depression, whatever the thing is, or there's a story on loop, and every single time you come back to the 6 steps and it's that same story over and over and over again, then you're missing the point in the final step, because that's why we're actually going to take action on something that's coming up. So those are the 6 steps, and
Great.
that's an overview. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great big picture overview. So in terms of like applying the 6 steps, what do you recommend for how I know you just said there's no way to say like you should do it this often or what have you, but is it something that people should, how much time should people give themselves to do it? Should it take
Yeah.
them 15 minutes, a half hour, or should it be less? Should it be something they try to do every day initially? Or, what's the way to go about doing it that you would say, generally speaking?
Yeah, I mean, generally speaking, I'd give yourself a couple of minutes. I wouldn't put a stopwatch on for 90 seconds and be like, okay, this is what I'm doing for those 90 seconds, but like try to keep it under 5 minutes. If you're someone who wants to go deep on this and really explore, then yeah, like make a little ceremony around it, put some intentionality on it and really go deep and see how long it takes, and don't put a time limit on it. If you're someone who is like, this sounds good in theory, but like when I'm feeling stuff, I can't just like say to other people or whatever the situation is, like, I'm sorry, like I have to go do this thing and then I'll come back. And that's where compartmentalization comes in. And I did a amazing podcast with my friend Alicia Kay on compartmentalization, because she's a clinical therapist, trauma therapist. And I hit her up a year so ago and I was like, Alicia, I don't understand compartmentalization. Like, I think that's a bad thing. And I was like, can we do a podcast on it? So basically, what we ended on was like, compartmentalization is great because it helps you in the moment so that you can perform and do whatever it is you need to do. But then what I was saying was, but the problem is, people put these things in a box and they never go back and open the box. And
Mhm.
that's where compartmentalization is bad, and why I was like, I don't think this is a good thing, because anytime I've ever heard that word used, people aren't going back and opening that box. So for me, like, I've never really thought about compartmentalization for myself much, but I do feel that in this scenario of someone being like, yeah, if I'm in a meeting or if I'm, talking with the spouse or whatever the thing is, hopefully with your spouse, you can be like, hey, just give me a couple minutes, right? Hopefully in that kind of scenario. But like, if you're in a meeting or presentation or anything where you physically can't run through these steps, then yeah, that's where compartmentalization would come through. And then later on, before you go to bed, like, start to unpack this and then drift off to sleep on the positive side once you get to steps 5 and 6.
Yeah, I think that's a good point you make, and I think it's important to be aware of this because, like, for a lot of us, including myself, like I feel like I have to compartmentalize, like, because like when stuff comes up, like, I'm busy and I'm often with my children or like working with clients or something like that, like, and it's like I don't have time because I'm a law processor. So like I know, like, if I can ground myself and know that this is stuff that if I can't work through it now, I can work through it tonight. I can, like, that works really well for me. And I think David Hawkins, in one of his books, maybe Letting Go, he talks about like, it's not bad to like suppress emotion. Like, it's beneficial to do that sometimes. It's like, because you're in so many different life situations, but the point is you just don't want to keep it suppressed so it becomes repressed. You then want to give it, exactly as you say, the space to actually fully explore it and then act upon what you find. And that, that leads us to something that I'm just curious your, not even opinion, just some thoughts on this. Like, what I see in the law of attraction, law of assumption space all the time is uh, the opposite of the business world, where people are so non-action oriented. It's very easy to interpret Neville um, as someone basically saying you don't have to take much, if any, action. I personally don't think that's what he meant. Usually it was a different time back then. Language was different. The expectations of like how much you worked were different, like what people did. But this day and age, I mean, you go on YouTube or social media, it's like, do nothing and it will manifest overnight, or do nothing, it will manifest in 3 days or 3 weeks or what have you. And, I see partially where that's true in some ways on deep psychological levels, like when you have those profound insights, but on a day-to-day level, I think that's usually awful advice, because action is just an inherent part of being human. Like you're not going to just, if you're sitting in a cave all day, you're sitting in a cave all day to sit in a cave. Like we're talking about practice makes practice. Like, it's like, if you want that better job or that better life situation, that better romantic partner or what have you, it's inevitable you're going to be taking action. Like, I'm just curious if you could speak any thoughts about like what you've noticed about that and integrating this stuff and then like the business community, as opposed to kind of this very ethereal up in space,
Mhm.
more spiritual community that has trouble taking appropriate action.
Yeah, I think the spiritual community definitely spiritually bypasses a lot in that way, in a lot of ways, where it's just floating through their life and all is perfect, all of these things. And so I see a lot of that and resonate with that. I think it's Bashar Darrell Anka that says this. I'm not sure. Maybe it's Neville, maybe it's Dispenza or someone else, but like taking aligned action. That might be a Dispenza thing where it's like let it go and take aligned action, the appropriate action. So I definitely resonate with that. For me, I think I might have shared this with you, but when I came across your book, Relax More, Try Less, and that's right, Manifestation Through Relaxation, that was the other one. I kept listening to those back to back, like over and over and over and over again. And I got to a point where I was just like, screw it, like for a few weeks or something, I just was like, I'm hustling way too hard. I'm going way too hard, which was very out of alignment for me of who I am becoming in these past 5 years of getting into spirituality. And I needed to slow down. And I feel like my version of relaxing and slowing down is probably still taking much more action than the average spiritual person that you're alluding to, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. So for me, like that was a beautiful place to come to. And I came to that place again a few months ago. And both of those times, my manifestations really increased. Where I'm working on is not taking so much action and bringing it in more space to relax and receive. And that's a challenge for me personally. And right now I'm in another one of those seasons where it's very much like in outward expression and in the masculine. And this is like you alluded to or said, it's practice makes practice, like I think of everything I do from a soul life balance perspective, feminine, masculine, inner world, outer world, yin yang, whatever. But this too, I don't put a percentage on it being like, oh, it needs to be a 50-50 split, 50% relaxation, 50% like hustling or trying or doing. I mean, I don't like the word hustling. But yeah, I think for me, the because I have such a big experience in taking action, I personally need to prioritize more the relaxation. Whereas a lot of the demographic that you're speaking to, they're the opposite, but it's so easy for them to be like, oh, but no, XYZ. And it's that slippery slope of spiritually bypassing. Quick story: in 2020, around May or so, when the lockdowns were, pretty new and we were very much in it, I started to see a lot of people writing books that had like, oh man, like, I've always wanted to write a book. And I just wrote my three first books in less than 12 months, like 2 years before that, maybe less than 2 years before that. And I was a year sitting with Soul Life Balance, this message that I received in an ayahuasca ceremony. I had a vision of writing a book on it. I had a vision of speaking on stage, but I didn't know what it would be about. So I very much wanted to write this book because, like, hey, I have all this extra time and now comparisonitis because everyone else is writing their books. And I just put out like a new course. And I had a friend reflect back to me, like, Sam, maybe it's time for you to slow down. And I'm like, what do you mean? Like, this is pedal to the metal. Like, we gotta go. Like, the world's falling apart, and my business is falling apart. Like, I can't just ease off, because I'm a year into this journey of, even though like I've been receiving messages and I know, but I just couldn't do it. So thankful for that friend, a few friends, spirit animals, different messengers coming in to help me to slow down, where ultimately I did slow down. And in terms of writing the book specifically, a year later, I went to a yoga retreat, and there was about 15 people there, and every single person there had been into spirituality or even mindfulness for 10, for 5, 10, 15 years or longer. I had been into this stuff like deep dive for just over 2 years. Yet for the 2 or 3 days of this yoga retreat, every single day, everyone was looking to me and asking me like all these questions about spirituality because I was going so deep. And driving home from that retreat, I was like, oh, wow, like I'm at the 12th step of this hero's journey cycle of doing a deep dive. Now Soul Life Balance is ready to be written because I've embodied the message. I am embodying it. I know what it's about. So it can be really challenging for anyone listening that's like a little bit more like me, that is on the doing side, to slow down. And for anyone listening that is more on the lack of taking action, like, this is where accountability comes in. And, it's almost like the Four Agreements. Everyone loves that book. I didn't read that book for years because I was like, yeah, got it. I get it. And then I listened to the book and I was like, cool. Like, I was like, I don't see what the big deal is here. I'm like, this is basic stuff. Like, yeah, no, obviously, but I think this is a challenge for anyone listening that resonates with that book, because you probably resonate with that book, but still don't take action. Are you being impeccable with your word and holding yourself accountable? This is where you can put it out there, find accountability friends or mentors and coaches like Tim. Reach out to a coach for guidance, but this is where we really need to step up and be like, no, it's not all unicorns and rainbows, and I'm just going to meditate and the world's going to be healed, like, to a certain extent. Like, sure, yes, and
You have
so
to
yeah.
integrate it. I mean,
Yeah.
that's it. And that's what it's all about. I mean, that's what I think this convo, hopefully for people listening, some people got that. And, I think that's, both of us are just going to continue to hammer home this point of what we're talking about, because I know we'll wrap up in a sec, Sam. Let me just and with I wrote Relax More, Try Less more for people like yourself. And
Yeah.
I came from real estate and hustling. Basically, it's like, if I rent an apartment, I make money. If I don't rent an apartment, I don't make money. You know what I mean? So it's like, I have to take action. It's not like, oh, I hope the person comes in. I hope this is a good lead. Oh, should I call them now? Or like, it's like, no, so like, that's like too hyper, right? It would burn me out when it was busy every single year. But I think that's where I come from. And I've always been a chill Zen guy, quote unquote, but like Neville and some of these great spiritual, more new agey teachers helped me realize the practical benefits of relaxation. But you still got to take action, in my opinion, most of the time. I mean, come on, guys. And again, this is where you do need accountability from yourself or from someone. And unfortunately, you don't see it provided, in social media, where it is just this group think of like, oh, we're just gonna, you just assume it and let it be, thoughts create your reality. And it's like, well, prove it to me. If your thoughts create your reality, great. But like, I don't know. I see when I talk to people like you and people who have, created a lot of external success, none of them have been like, oh yeah, I didn't take much action. It's just, what kind of action do you want to take? Like, do you want to take a lot of stressed action, or like, are you willing to hopefully relax more into what you want to do, have to do, and need to do that day? Like, if you're not as externally focused and can find some kind of yin yang type of, healthier relationship, the action is going to feel natural, but you still got to do it. So, yeah.
100.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much for being on. And is there anything, definitely everybody check out Sam's new book and all of Sam's books. He's an excellent writer, and as well, he's got a podcast as well. Sam, where's the best place to find you? Is there any parting words of wisdom that you want to leave us with?
Yeah, absolutely. My website's samkabert.com. That's KAB as in boy, ERT. And the book is Overcome the Overwhelm. You can get it for as little as $5, depending on when you're listening to this. So act quick. It's on Amazon, Overcome the Overwhelm. Parting words. All right, let's see. So I used to say this a lot, and it's been a while since I've said this, but I feel like the human experience is so well. Let me try this again. I feel like the symbol of infinity is such a great representation of this human experience, because we have our highs and our lows, yet we always come back to meet ourselves exactly where we're at. So when I look at the symbol and I zoom out, if I'm like in the thick of it, right, it helps me to put everything into perspective and allow myself to be there. And at the same time, I just had a really stimulating conversation with a friend the other day about Dark Night of the Soul versus cocoons. And I feel like it's something I'm playing with. So don't hold me to it, but I feel like, if you're in a dark night of the soul and you've been telling yourself you're in dark night of the soul and it's been months, probably chances are that you haven't actually accepted and surrendered and you're a little bit in victim mentality, or you might be in the cocoon phase, because the cocoon phase actually has a different energetic charge than the dark night of the soul. It doesn't have any of that poor me victim mentality, or like my situation is so hard. It's more like true acceptance. So I'm really excited to play with this concept more of like how the Dark Knight and the cocoon work together, because I think it's going to be such a massive reframe for so many people. So invitation to sit with that. But thank you, Tim. This has been awesome. I
Oh,
appreciate you having me.
thank you, Sam. That was fascinating. I'm looking forward to hearing more about that. I hope you also end up writing a book about that. But that's fascinating. I'd love to have you back on to talk about that when you start talking, when you start expressing your more views about that. Yeah, feel free to reach out to Sam. His website will be linked below in the description. And thank you, everybody, for another fun interview. See you later. Bye.